What's up, everybody? Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. Okay, let's get right to it. Today's topic is just sparked from something that I saw on social media, a little conversation back and forth about everybody's friend, the deadlift. And specifically for the deadlift, traditional style deadlifts with a barbell, sumo deadlifts with a barbell, and then the trap bar deadlift. Is there one that's better than another? Is there one that's the one you're supposed to do in a workout for a mixed modality Metcon versus a heavy day? So we'll kind of dive right in. And each one has not their pros and cons, it is what it is. So hopefully this is just kind of beneficial and informative to people. But whether you're doing traditional deadlifts, sumo deadlifts, or trap bar, you're picking something up off the ground. You're doing a good movement. Okay, and you're not doing a machine-based movement, you're doing a real movement, so you're in the right ballpark no matter what. Most of the time, in what we see, if you're doing a heavy day, 7x1, 5x5 for the deadlift, or whatever it happens to be, see JJ said the dumbbell deadlift as well. Absolutely, my friend. The dumbbell deadlift is fantastic. But if you're doing a 7x1 heavy day, or you're doing, Diane 2159 deads and handstand push-ups, you're usually seeing the traditional deadlift. And so you've got, your hands are outside of your legs are inside of your hands. Your stance is about hip to shoulder width, roughly speaking. It's very demanding on the posterior chain, glutes, hamstrings, spinal erectors. Spinal erectors just due to the position of how your back is over the bar. It's very demanding on your back strength. Of course, your quads, abs, lats, grip. I mean, it's a head-to-toe lift for sure, but quite demanding on the posterior chain. Probably why the traditional deadlift is so big in CrossFit and, strength and conditioning in general, but particularly probably in CrossFit. In CrossFit, we're really big on getting the most bang for our buck with the most limited supply of movements. And so if you think about how one movement transfers or gives you the ability to do other movements, the traditional deadlift probably gets the nod in that aspect between itself, the sumo, and a trap bar. Because even though it's not an ideal analog, practicing the traditional deadlift is going to lend itself better to you learning the clean. And then when you learn the clean, you get to go overhead. And so it's a great stepping stone for that, whereas the sumo is not going to set you up as well to learn the clean, nor is the trap bar deadlift. So with regards to opening the door to other movements, the nod probably goes to the traditional, just due to the general body positioning. And the tough thing, they all require technique. Hopefully that goes without saying. All of them do. And they're all going to get you strong, and they're all awesome. But one of the probably larger obstacles for the traditional deadlift, but it's also one of the things that if an athlete learns it's very beneficial, is that you need to deal with the knees. You've got to get your knees and move your body in appropriate sequence of events to clear the way for the bar to move up in a nice straight line. And if you don't do that well, you're not going to be met with a lot of success with the traditional deadlift. It's going to be inefficient and, it's going to strain yourself in ways that you shouldn't. So dealing with the knees, even though it's an obstacle to overcome, it's actually one of the great benefits because it sets you up down the road for other movements. So that's the traditional deadlift. For the sumo deadlift, what's cool about the sumo deadlift is, all things being equal, most people can probably lift more weight with the sumo deadlift compared to the traditional deadlift. And that's cool. Who doesn't want to lift more weight? So that's a good thing right there. You might set your best ever lifetime PR of picking something up off the ground with the sumo. You've got a stance that's different. So this time you have your hands are inside of your legs. Your legs are in a wide stance. And that can be a pro or a con, because that stance, depending upon the width that you choose that's safe and appropriate for you, some decent mobility in the hips is going to be needed to get into a really nice sumo position. So that's something that's actually a bit more challenging there. Your upper body is going to be more upright in a sumo as compared to a traditional deadlift. So this can be, because your upper body is more upright, less demanding on the back. Now, don't get me wrong, you're deadlifting, so it's still very demanding on your back, but compared to the traditional deadlift, less demanding than the traditional deadlift. And of course, you still got the glutes and hamstrings and head to toe strength being required. But if you had to say between the sumo and the traditional, you would probably say that the sumo, it was going to be a bit more demanding on the quads than the traditional deadlift was. Now, the range of motion is decreased. If you just measured how far the bar moves from being on the ground to full lockout for the same athlete on a traditional deadlift compared to a sumo deadlift, it would be less range of motion on the sumo deadlift. And so if you have to move a heavy object not quite as far, that's also setting yourself up to probably have a higher load lifted there as well. And then if you picture you're in this really wide stance with your hands closer together, that doesn't have as much transference to the clean. The sumo would not, as compared to the traditional deadlift there. And don't get me wrong, you still need to deal with your knees and, a nice clear bar path with the sumo deadlift, but the knees aren't quite as troublesome regarding their position as they are in the traditional deadlift. So it's a little friendlier with regards to that. And the sumo stance might be preferred by people that have very long legs. They might struggle getting into a classic traditional deadlift setup. They might just feel instantly more comfortable in a sumo stance. So that can be a great thing for there as well. And it can also be really good not only just for long legs, but for somebody that maybe has a creaky back, a bad back issues, whatever it is that you want to say. Since the upper torso is more upright and you're not as leaned over, again, like I said, don't get me wrong, it's still demanding on the back, but less so than traditional. The people that have those back issues might also gravitate towards a sumo style deadlift as compared to a traditional style deadlift. And also, I guess if you think about how you would, now we're leaving the gym, how you would pick something up in the real world, an odd object. Well, most odd objects are kind of more like a D-ball or a sandbag, meaning like you would straddle the object, you'd get your legs wide, you'd reach down to grab, and your hands would be inside your legs. Well, that's actually a lot more similar to a sumo stance than to a deadlift stance. And so again, neither lift is right or wrong. They just both have their list of attributes, and it's up to you to figure out which of those attributes fit your agenda or your goals. And then you've got the trap bar deadlift. So for the trap bar deadlift, there's going to be a lot of people that are most certainly going to lift more with a trap bar deadlift than they could with a traditional deadlift as well, for a couple of reasons. Just the way that the trap bar is set up, and if you don't know what that is, just Google trap bar deadlift. The range of motion from where your hands are, it's higher than where a barbell would be, and so you don't have to pull, the range of motion is not quite as far, so again, that sets you up for lifting a larger load. And because you're inside this contraption in the trap bar, it takes the ability of you having to deal with your knees out of the equation, and that could be a good or a bad thing, because you could just probably trap bar deadlift over and over again, not paying attention to the sequence of events that you're moving your body and doing it not well, or you could do it well, but you don't have to deal with the knees. So that's a potential advantage there as well. And it can be, again, you can also play with the position, since that bar isn't influencing your knees, with raising and lowering your hips a lot more than you potentially could with a traditional deadlift as well. So again, none of these things are right or wrong, right? You're deadlifting. You're on the home team for the big win, regardless of whether you're doing traditional, sumo, or trap bar. Variance is a wonderful thing. And so play with all these things. Here can be another great thing is, if you've been working out for 10 years, you might feel like you're in a rut. You might get bored, because how many times have you done a 7x1 deadlift or whatnot? So choose a new lift, maybe on one of those days, and if you've never done that lift before, then guess what? It's going to be a PR day, because you've never done it before. And it's a slightly new thing for you to play around and experiment with, and so it might breathe some new life and some excitement into a training session that you've done a ton and maybe you were growing bored with. And so if you always traditional deadlift, maybe the next time a 5x3 comes up, fire up the sumo deadlift. It's probably going to be really cool. It's going to hit a bit different. You're going to learn something about yourself, and it's going to be awesome. And you could even do that in a mixed modality workout as well. You could do Diane, 2159 deads and handstand push-ups. You could do that with a trap bar. You could do that with a sumo stance. It's total, hey, there are no rules here. The rules are, don't do stupid things. Those are the rules. But within those rules, you have a lot of freedom as to what you can do and still get a tremendous amount of positive benefit. And you could also not only play with traditional deadlifts, sumo deadlifts, or trap bar deadlifts, but you could also play with deficit deadlifts. You could play with that either on a classic heavy day or in a mixed modality session either. You could play with touch and go reps compared to dead stop reps. You could do Diane, 2159. Dead stop is going to be a very different experience with whatever load you normally use for Diane, and you do a touch and go, and then you decide to do a dead stop, you're about to have a different experience, and it's actually going to be really cool. And so you could do that in mixed modality Metcon, and of course you could do it on a classic heavy day as well. You've got your 7x1, 5x5, or whatever deadlift scheme you're doing, and you always do the 5x5 touch and go, do a dead stop. And then you can do a dead stop maintaining tension the entire time, or deadlift dead stop where you release tension, regain tension, and then pull the next lift. All going to be good. So again, no one right or wrong, just kind of understanding your options between traditional deadlift, sumo stance, and a trap bar deadlift are just more toys and more options, and that makes training fun and keeps you engaged. And we're all marching together doing deadlifts. So that's it. Have a great day. We'll talk later.